Hello, and welcome to this joint webinar with Connectedly and Anderson Elder Law. Our topic today is what's changing with Medicare and Medicaid. I am Mary Pat Tracy, and I'm the Executive Director at Connectedly. Since 1984, Connectedly has built and sustained community support networks to reduce social isolation and improve the well-being of older adults, especially women and their families. Social isolation is a serious problem in our society. Dr. Murthy, the former Surgeon General of the United States, described social isolation as dangerous to our health and well-being as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. 15 cigarettes a day. Connectedly works every day to combat social isolation. Our speaker today is Chari, Alson, certified elder law attorney, partner at Anderson Elder Law. Anderson Elder Law specializes in 4 types of elder law and life care planning, estate planning and wealth transfer, special needs planning, and estate and trust administration probate. Chari received her JD from Temple University and her master's in public health and a gerontology certificate from Boston University. As many of you know, Medicare and Medicaid have always been complicated systems that confuse many of us. With recent changes to these systems, the confusion has increased. Today, Chari will provide us with clear, practical overview of what is changing, how it may impact families across different income levels, and steps you can take now to plan ahead with confidence. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded, so if you'd like to rewatch it or share it with someone, we'll make the recording available on each of our websites. Feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A feature in Zoom at any point during the session. We'll answer as many as we can throughout, and we'll also leave time at the end for additional questions and answers. Please note, we cannot provide personal legal advice during the webinar. If you have specific questions about your situation, Anderson Elder Law would be happy to schedule a time for you to speak with them, with one of their client service coordinators. And now we will begin. Chari?
Great. Oh, well, thank you so much. We're just thrilled to be partnering with Connectedly. The mission of the organization really speaks to us as elder care attorneys. Solo agers is a really huge problem that without a lot of solutions. Uh, for us, we're always trying to find great resources in the community for our solo agers so that they can get a solid estate plan in place. We have found that it's that not having somebody that comes to mind that often puts our solo agers at the greatest risk because they put off doing their estate plan thinking there's nobody that can help them. And that simply isn't the case. And we'll get into that as we go along. And I think all of us learn, and particularly elder care attorneys and my colleagues who had a front row seat to the impact of isolation as we tried to assist clients through the pandemic. We had many clients that didn't get to see their families for months at a time. And it really had a tremendous negative impact on their health and well-being. I haven't seen any data on this. I'm sure it's out there that, COVID was, the root cause, but I think the isolation and lack of connectedness probably had a huge impact on health span and lifespan of agers, in our long-term care facilities. And so, I think a mission of an organization to promote connectedness, which I think is so often overlooked, is just wonderful. So we're happy to be co-presenting today. Now we're going to talk about what's changing, but what you really need to know is if most people, I think if you join the webinar, watch the news, and this is ongoing, right? So we had the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the acronym OBBB, that was passed last summer, that some of the provisions aren't going to take place strategically until after the midterm elections and after. There's a lot in the news going on now. So we kind of are in a changing landscape, but I'll do my best to cover that. But where I always like to start is just making sure that we're debunking some myths, because I think a lot of um, the people I talk to every day, clients that I do consultations with, there needs to be a solid foundation of factual information that will allow you to be somewhat immune to the fantastical stuff that might come across your inbox, your Facebook, your Instagram, things like that. If you have an understanding generally of how it's supposed to work, I'm hopeful that through education, we can get people to at least go, wait, that doesn't sound quite right, right? That can't be true, right? Like, oh, everybody's losing their benefits. My mother's going to be kicked out of her nursing home is a big one, right? That they're going to be mass discharged. We can talk about that. So for me, we want to give, have some education here. I can change my slide. Just sort of a practical overview. And that's really, why I want to provide that, because we are in an age of information, right? And we can even have, you know, artificial intelligence distill down what the internet has to offer. And it's pretty good, right? We absolutely look at that every day in our practice, because I want to know what y'all are seeing before you come to meet with me. What happens when people put in certain search terms? And sometimes it's close, sometimes it's wildly off. But we really want to make sure we give you a practical overview. And what I always want to say here is what you get on the internet, my clients get on the internet, is not designed to address your situation. So before you go into what I have termed, and hopefully I didn't make this up, but if I did, I should trademark it, Google panic, right? So these are the people that come to meet with me, and they have their papers, in hand, or they have all their questions written out based on things they've Googled, and they're really, really, really anxious, right? And half of it is just completely inapplicable to their situation, and they've lost sleep, sometimes nights at a time, I hear, over things that just simply aren't true. So again, that's why we incorporate a good deal of education, because if you don't understand what's factual, what the foundation of this stuff is, you're going to get yourself in those situations where maybe you're not making good decisions, like giving away assets when you shouldn't be doing that, making care decisions that aren't appropriate, and things like this. So we're gonna sort of cover all that. And again, for us, most people don't come to see us proactively. It would be our hope and wish that more people came to us before the crisis point. And no judgment for anybody that comes to us in a crisis. We will take you wherever we find you. But what happens is, if you wait until crisis, for me, as someone who's been doing this for almost 23 years, the part that always makes me sad is if you've waited too long, perhaps our older adult is no longer able to participate in the critical discussions about where they want to age, where they want to get health care, who they want to have as their surrogate decision makers, right? That to me is the huge lost opportunity, right? When we wait too long. Now, yes, and of course there's the economics. Oh, we could have saved money, perhaps, if we had acted sooner. But for us, dignity, autonomy, identifying the needs of our client are really at the forefront of what we do. That's why we are elder care attorneys. The care comes first, right? Figuring out what the care is. And our law firm is what's called a life care planning law firm. So this is a somewhat unique model, but there are firms all over the country doing this model, where we bring in elder care coordinators in-house as part of our team, who help and go out and meet with our clients to figure out where they fall on the continuum of care, so that we can do the planning that aligns with the desired care plan. Not necessarily, but it oftentimes does include asset protection. But for me, we're really focused on this, the elder care continuum. I love this is one of my favorite slides because it gives you so much at a go. What most people are worried about when they think about, Medicare, Medicaid, what's changing, how does it apply to me? They're really worried about the far right, of this continuum of care, right? That I'm going to end up in a nursing home with all of those dollar signs, right? And I'm gonna lose all of my savings. And then there's this kind of panic, and panic decisions are almost never good ones. What we always encourage our clients to explore are the middle part of the continuum, right? Where you have limited function, more function, and then you sort of decline. That the sooner you start recognizing that you might have even a pinky toe on the continuum of care, that is really the time to get serious about planning, right? Again, most people come to me when they're already at significant limited function, but we're seeing more often as we move along, and there's a few life care planning law firms in our community, thankfully, that with education, people are understanding that, oh, I can do this before I head into crisis, and that there's actually significant benefit to me. If we look down at the very bottom part of the chart here, the resources available, we know that if you have no limits, you're not paying for care. But what you are doing at that level, and I think this kind of aligns with what Connectedly is all about, is that you are trying to remain as vital in your community and your connections as possible. I've given a talk a few times at a senior center, which is kind of like preaching to the choir, because these are really wonderful, connected adults, right? But I know they have friends and family who might not be so lucky, right, to be able to get out every day. But for them, maintaining those social connections, even if they just go for the exercise class or go for lunch or go occasionally, booked it, like that stuff that seems like it's sort of trivial and fluff is so important. Again, I think the pandemic made us realize that this isn't soft stuff. This is the actual kind of grail, if you will, to aging well, right? Maintaining those connections, maintaining your health, prioritizing your health, stress management, things like that, keeps you off of the continuum to begin with. And as they mentioned, I went to school for public health after I got my bachelor's degree. I've always had a strong interest in dementia and healthcare policy. From the time I was a teenager, I worked in aging. I was a nurse's aide at a psychiatric hospital. Long story short, I got fired from Bennigan's, and that was the next job I was able to get. If you meet me, well, I'll tell you more. But the idea is I got this job working in a psychiatric hospital, and I noticed that clients that had managed care, a sticker on their chart, right, were being sent home much quicker than those that had traditional coverage, right? And I thought, hey, as a kid, right, I'm 19, that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem fair. What is being done about that? And I wanted to learn more about it, right? So the idea is that we all need to sort of understand well ahead of time how all of this stuff can impact us. And that sort of started me on my sort of personal kind of aging journey. But what we learn is that all of this stuff impacts us one way or another. But the thing they taught us when I went to public health school is this one saying that's always stuck with me, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So it goes to that idea of doing these preventative activities, staying connected, prioritizing your health, prioritizing your mental health, are really what's very key to keeping you sort of off the continuum. Or if you do find yourself on the continuum, you're not just going to have sort of a straight shot, hopefully, to the nursing home. Now, not all of us aren't so lucky. So I can tell my parents were two widely different things. My dad just turned 86 and walked a 5K. He wants you to know he did it at a 3-mile-an-hour pace in an hour and 4 minutes. He needs you to know that. And he did it in honor of my mom, who died of Alzheimer's almost a year prior, right? So they had two very different aging journeys, did the same things, the same sort of things to stay connected with their community. So that's not a cure-all, right? But it can go a long way, right, to keeping us off the continuum in helping us kind of not progress as far down to nursing home level. The biggest point of confusion that I see again with people when they, again, before you understand what's changing, you got to understand what is that Medicare, Medicaid, right? And I want to say here that this isn't about being smart or not versus not smart, that you don't understand. I have clients of all different levels of very high intelligence mistake the two all the time. I think they messed up when they named them back in 1965. They should have made them a little bit more different so people aren't quite so confused. But this is a big point of confusion. If you don't understand this and what it covers, the news and the noise, right, that we're all subjected to, it is going to kind of overtake you. So let's kind of go through it a little bit quickly. So Medicare is an age-based entitlement program. You reach 65, you've worked sufficient quarters, you have a spouse who has, you're going to be eligible for it. It's a federal program, has a little bit of a long-term care benefit. We'll get into it. Whereas Medicaid is a needs-based poverty program. I had clients come to me and they said, we have $20 million. Can I get on Medicaid? And I had to say, you need to look at the word poverty, right? Like that, it isn't for you, right? That yes, there are things that we can do to accelerate eligibility for certain folks, but if you have $20 million, I'm sorry to say you have to pay for your own health care. It is a federal and state joint program, which is again where a lot of the noise is coming from in terms of things that are going on at the states. We'll look at that in a minute. This is our long-term custodial care coverage. So I love data. I hope you do too. I love statistics. So this is one I pulled for today. So it says, and it takes them a while to compile the data. So it is a little bit behind, but it says in 2023, Medicaid paid for approximately $257 billion in total federal and state spending on long-term care services and supports. So that acronym, again, as you're learning about this stuff and seeing it in the news, LTSS is the acronym, long-term services and supports. And it was accounting for 45.6% of all long-term services and supports expenditures. It's the primary payer. This has been the case for a very long time for long-term care, covering 69% of home care, which is, impacted by some changes, and 44% of institutional care in nursing homes. So Medicaid is the safety net, right? It is covering a lot of people's health care, right? And there is also waste, fraud, and abuse, right? So those things are all going on, but we're sort of in an era in terms of what's changing, what's going on, where the focus on waste, fraud, and abuse is kind of taking center stage, and states are getting funding stripped away for certain things, and then the federal government is asking for substantiation later. In Pennsylvania, we're not seeing that quite yet, so don't panic. But it's really important to understand sort of foundationally what a critical safety net this is and how much of the government spending is needed to really keep it going. And even where we are right now, what we have, even though that number, 257 billion, seems really big, it's not enough, right? We all know, we've all been to the presentations where we talk about, the number of older adults, it's booming, things like this. We have this, the reason advocates are so fired up is because this doesn't just impact older adults, right? It's also impacting family caregivers, right? So this is not just, an old person problem. This affects all of us, right? So really, really critical piece to think about. So for anybody, in Washington saying like, oh, it's just about greedy providers and old people in nursing homes, that is an incredibly narrow view, and that is absolutely not what's going on. There's lots of great advocates firing in letters, and lots of people joining those letters into, key stakeholders in Congress. And I'm really hopeful that those voices can get heard. But moving on. Again, foundationally, just want to make sure you have the basics. Medicare, we all know this, but I'm just going to cover it so you know, and maybe give you a little bit of education on some things you might not know. So Medicare, we know, is divided into four parts. Part A is going to be our hospital insurance. It covers inpatient hospital stays, skilled nursing facility care after a hospitalization, an inpatient hospitalization of 3 overnights, right? And that's really critical. There was, an issue for patients, and this is I haven't been hearing about it as much, but I think it's still really critical. The idea of making sure that your loved one is an inpatient and not in observation status, right? That you want them admitted, because if they don't get that admission with the 3 overnights, that subsequent rehab stay is not going to be covered by the Medicare program, right? So you want to be good advocates. And if you have any issues on that, you want to call, there's great resources. One of them that I love, locally is the Pennsylvania Health Law Project. It's a wonderful organization with a helpline. You also want to look at a national resource that I think has fantastic information, and that's the Centers for Medicare Advocacy. And I think their website is www.medicareadvocacy.org. It's a really great resource in terms of webinars and toolkits and things you can do. They empower you to be a great advocate for your loved one. And then I want to also touch on here a thing I hear a lot about the rehab, right? So let's say you have your 3 overnights and you think, I'm good. I get 100 days. And she's shaking her head. Yes. So it is up to 100 days. I know I always pour some cold water on people's heads when I deliver that news, but it's true. It's up to, it is an insurance decision, but oftentimes the coverage is much shorter, right? The thing to note here from an advocacy point of view that they have done away with years ago, they just celebrated probably 12 years now, the JIMO settlement, which made it clear, it was supposed to make it clear for nursing facilities that the standard is not one of improvement or that the person has plateaued, right? That as long as they are, it's keeping and maintaining their level of functioning, they should be able to continue to get their rehab time. There is a wonderful toolkit. I mentioned the Centers for Medicare Advocacy. They have what's called the JIMO Settlement Toolkit. So if you hear of somebody, maybe that says, oh, my loved one got cut because they plateaued, or they're going to get cut because I heard they plateaued, that is no longer the standard. You want to go over and, Google, Chat GPT, whatever your internet god of choices these days, and look up JIMO settlement and get the resources to be a good advocate there. Part B is our medical insurance. It covers doctor's visits, outpatient care, medical supplies, preventative services. This is the one that has the monthly premium, right? That can be keyed to your income. So a practice tip here, or something to note here, if you have a big income realization event, your premiums are going to go up. So you want to make sure you're aware of that, if you have a change in income situation. Part C, otherwise known as Medicare Advantage plans, and it's an alternative, right, to our Parts A and B, right? This is what you can opt into. People love it because it provides extra benefits not covered by A and B, like dental, vision, and hearing. And people think, well, that's good. I want that stuff, right? And listen, dear old dad who walked that 5K, he's not a heavy user, or wasn't a heavy user of Medicare his services. So he years ago went into an Advantage plan, and then a year ago he had a heart attack. And so we had some fun discussions. I got to say, I told you so. But now he's back. He's back on the mend, and so we didn't switch his plan, and he's still in his Advantage plan and walking and doing great. But the thing to be aware of is if you're in that Advantage plan, you often don't have a Medigap plan, the supplemental plan. And when we look later on with the way that the copays could be structured for a rehab stay, if you don't have the supplemental, you're on your own for those copays, and that can be pretty challenging for folks. prescription drugs, Part D, I think everybody knows about that. But it only covers short-term rehab. So when we talked about Medicare and Medicaid, what's the difference? Even with all the information out on the internet, I hear a couple times a week, oh, but won't the Medicare if continue the coverage if my mom can't come home? The answer is no. All right, so it's short-term rehab only. Now we want to try to maximize so we get as much of our 100 days as we can, and there's appeals and things that you can do, but understanding that it's just short-term rehab is really critical. So as we just said, it doesn't cover long-term nursing home care. So what happens a lot of times in the clients that I see, mom or dad is in the my clients in the nursing home, they had the rehab stay, they were really declining at home, right, which prompted the hospitalization and the rehab stay, and the light sort of goes on with the family of, you know what, home wasn't working, right? There was all kinds of things going on. And with mom or dad being in the rehab, we've kind of realized that this is where he or she needs to be, right? They get their cut notice. Now it's $500 a day, and the light bulb goes on in a different way. The panic button starts to sound, and that's how we get a lot of calls into our office. So because it doesn't cover long-term nursing care, or if the person goes home, it doesn't cover extended home care. So again, you want to make sure you understand this now while you're healthy. And if you didn't plan ahead, it's okay. Most people don't. So I'm never here to make anybody feel bad about not planning ahead. What I do want to hopefully make people feel is hopeful that it's never too late to plan. There's always something that you can do, and that there are lots of resources out there, but you want to make sure you get good guidance. So find your favorite elder care attorney. We're not the only game in town, but I think we're the best one. I have to say that. But this stuff, this advice, what you do and what you don't do is all about you, right? Your assets, your family dynamics, the older, and most importantly, the older adults' preferences. That's sort of everything. So you can't do this through Google or ChatGPT, the critical work. When I do this work, it's me. It's an elder care coordinator. I have a Medicaid paralegal. I have a public benefits paralegal. I have a lady, her whole job is just collecting in all the documents that you need, right? I mean, just for starters, right? So I've got a whole team behind me to do this work, and it's hard, right? It's hard to do it well. It's hard to do it right, but we think it's important. So that's how we do it here. And so we don't encourage you sort of DIYing, right? For the most part, if somebody has $10 in a checking account and has Alzheimer's, for the last 15 years is in a nursing home, okay, maybe you got that one. But for everybody else who, where there's real concerns about where somebody is on that continuum of care, right? You really want to make sure that you're getting good support. So when we looked at going back to that slide, I'm not going to flip back to it because I'll never get back to where I am. It sort of presented the continuum of care sort of linearly, right? That is not what happens in practice. If any of you are either been in the healthcare system or taking care of somebody in the healthcare system, our clients bounce around a lot, right? They're in the rehab, they go home, then they have a decline, they go back to the hospital, and they end up in the rehab, and then they want to go home, and they decline. That's what I call the carousel of doom, right? When there's no interventions to give support, clients get on that carousel of doom, where they go home when it's not appropriate, and they do better for a time because they went through the hospital and the rehab and got a little bit better. They decline again, back in the hospital, back in the rehab. They feel better. Let's go home. Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. That is not the way to grow old, right? And I think, again, doing this a long time, and I'm not a psychologist, although some days I feel like one. I think why people get on that carousel and why families stay on that carousel is fear, right? Fear of not understanding the choices, fear of not understanding what is Medicare, what is Medicaid, fear of the cost, right? Fear that we're going to lose everything, fear that if I go into care, it's going to be like going into prison, right? We can, and with good education, support, counseling, get you through with my elder care coordinators, help people get unstuck, right? We want to get you off the carousel, get you placed, and have a successful placement, right? But you need to understand all this. And then again, getting advice that's tailored to you is really your best strategy here. So we've talked about this already. I don't want to belabor that, but again, again, the 100 days is not free. There are co-pays. You do get, preventative services, and you get hospice care. I just want to pause here for a second because I hear sometimes that families say, which is a Part A benefit, we don't want hospice because that means we're giving up, right? My grandmother was a 3-time hospice champion. She just kept graduating, right? So she went on hospice. She was a feisty old lady. Can't even repeat for you. She was that feisty. What she said, but I will paraphrase. I think the second time she graduated from hospice, she said, they said I was going to die, but guess what? Expletive deleted. So just know that the benefits that come from hospice can be really helpful, and actually people can graduate and go better. I've had a client, she was a 6-time graduate of hospice, right? It's not something to say like, oh, we're giving up. The person's is definitely going to pass away. It's a standard of, in 6 months, there's a likelihood. Nobody has a crystal ball. But the services, extra services and support that you can get are really invaluable, and sometimes can let you stay, sometimes, but not always, let you stay, let your loved ones stay in the place that they're at. So I'll share again another personal story. My mom, as she moved through her Alzheimer's, they said, the only way you can keep her here in memory care is if you agree to hospice, that we get extra support for our team. And I said, absolutely. My dad was, again, was nervous about making that decision. So he put me on FaceTime. So if you have a kid who's an elder care attorney, you get this perk, put me on FaceTime, and, we agreed on the power of attorney. So we agreed to hospice care. So I understand firsthand the emotionality of that kind of decision, but you really want to make sure you understand that it can be a critical benefit. So again, it's all about gaps, right? That the care needs often last longer than your Medicare coverage. So if we're doing pre-planning, understanding what your diagnosis is, what your possible disease trajectory is, we can get ahead of some of this stuff. And as I've already mentioned, clients get that first private pay bill, $12,000, $15,000, $16,000 a month. It blows their hair back, right? And it freaks them out because your savings, right? What your mom and dad, or what you've worked really hard for, you just see it all sort of evaporating. You quickly do the math, right? You think, oh gosh, at a burn rate of 15,000 a month, like it's all going to be gone soon. So it makes it really important to kind of get ahead of it, or if you're early in it, get professional help, right? Do not Google, because you will. And I say there's no judgment to any of the wonderful families who have come to me and DIY'd, and I had to unscramble the eggs, as it were. That is not a fun process for anyone. We would rather you get good advice and do it right initially than try to DIY and then potentially lose opportunities and lose money that otherwise could have been prevented. So Medicaid, you've kind of touched on this again. It's a program that helps pay for long-term care. It's based on your income and your assets. And one of the myths or things, again, in terms of understanding foundationally how this works, is that we have 2 places we can get Medicaid typically. One is in the home through home and community-based services, and one is in a skilled nursing facility. How income and assets are considered vary between those 2 programs slightly and in critical ways. And so a myth I hear sometimes is, oh, my loved one has too much income to qualify for Medicaid in a nursing home. That is actually not true. They might have too much income to qualify for home and community-based services, but unless your income is more than what the nursing home monthly rate is, right? So if you make $16,000 a month in income, and good for you if you do. You probably are going to get Medicaid because there's nothing for Medicaid to cover, right? Medicaid picks up the shortfall where your income leaves off, right? So another thing about your income when you move to a nursing facility, your income, this is not something that's widely understood until people come work with us, is that the income of the person in the facility is part of their cost of care. You've got to pay something, right? And then you get certain deductions for a whopping $60 for your personal needs every month. Went up from 45, which it was at for many, many years. And any health insurance premiums, like for your Part B, Medigap, things like that, that all gets deducted off. But otherwise, your income is counted towards your cost of care. And then the Medicaid program picks up the balance to pay the nursing home, right? So again, unless your income is over what the nursing home costs, you're not over income for the nursing home benefit. So we talked about the, so I'll go to the next one. So what determines eligibility? So there's two prongs, right? Like I've been talking about. We look at your income and we look at your assets, but you also have to be medically needy. So you need to be financially needy and medically needy. So sometimes people come to us and they don't meet the medically needy part, right? In order to qualify for a Medicaid home care benefit, a home and community-based services, it's not enough to just meet the income and assets test. You also need to meet the health test, right? And so when you apply for home and community-based services, the first two visits are really geared towards figuring out whether you actually clinically need the level of services that the program provides. And the whole purpose of home and community-based services, where did these things come from? And why are they called waiver services? It's because they were carved out or created after the original Medicaid program from 1965 with the idea that most people, and the data shows us, want to remain at home in their community where they have connection, where they have family, where people can easily visit them, where they maybe even can go to, their religious, place of worship, once a week or whatever it is that helps them feel like a human being, right? That we know that that's what people want. So then the states developed a waiver from the idea that they get these Medicare dollars to just have people in facilities to provide home care. Because this isn't part of the original program, it's not the entitlement piece. This is the part of Medicaid that is under attack right now, right? And it's kind of silly because the data also shows that this is far less expensive than institutional care. So it's kind of crazy but not bonkers, right? I won't use a bad word, but it is bonkers that we're sort of back to this idea of we're going to cut home care benefit, right? That allow people to get care workers who are paid to come into the home, that allow family caregivers to continue their employment. We're going to gut that, and instead we're going to have this facility bias. I mean, this is why advocates like me and people who are far more involved in advocacy, who aren't, sitting servicing clients every day, are just hopping mad, right? This because it makes no sense. It absolutely makes no sense. But in terms of, the level of care, to understand that sort of, again, the education piece, understanding foundationally that you do need to be medically needy to qualify. So going back to the financial piece, the asset limit generally is $2,400. If you are at home, the asset limit is $8,000. What counts as an asset and what doesn't count as an asset is really critical, and people get that wrong all the time, right? So for your assets, you're allowed to have a house, you're allowed to have a car, funeral, burial plot, all of those are non-countable. And anything you want to prepay for funeral services within reason. They figured that out. There are caps by county for how much you can spend on a funeral. So if you think, all right, I'm going to take my 100,000 and throw myself a Viking funeral when the time comes, and I'll get on Medicaid. No, they've thought of that already. So you want to know what your caps are. But the rules are very specific. They're intricate. And this is not something you want to do, and you definitely don't want to start transferring things until you understand what the rules are financially. So I'll say more on that in a minute. For Medicaid, home and community-based services, that's what HCBS stands for. We have a gross income limit that changes every year. This year it's 2,982 a month. It changes annually in January. That is a gross income limit. So some people will say, well, what goes into my checking account is this, right? From Social Security, for example. And it's not what goes into your checking account. It's that gross number. The policy of the Commonwealth is $1 over, no soup for you. Hopefully you remember that Seinfeld episode, right? That I have to come up with a new one because I think that's getting a little dated, but that's the idea that, there are though, certain exceptions. If you're no more than $500 over, advocates have worked for a workaround, if you will, but again, based on gross income, and it's a case by case basis. So really you want to be aware of what the gross income limit is and that it's gross and not net. I've already talked about meeting the nursing home level of care. Okay. There are special rules for married couples. So back in the 80s, they came up with the spousal impoverishment provisions, the idea that our spouse in the community should not be penalized because they had the misfortune to have a loved one that needs to be in a nursing home due to a diagnosis of, pick a thing, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, things like this. We know what the cost of care is, and they wanted to protect, right, our spouses who are remaining out in the community. This gives us planning opportunities, right? So if we have married couples, we want to make sure that you want to make sure you get advice and good advice on this, because you do not want to squander resources that might not otherwise need to be spent, right? Google said I could do it. No. The nursing home business office, as lovely as they are, said I should do it this way. No. What you need to understand is that the nursing home business office, their priority is getting the nursing home paid, right? So they're not trying to mislead you, but they're also not necessarily aligned with you. Okay. So I hear that a lot, that people, are told things by the folks in the business office. And no disrespect to them. We love our business office people, have very good and close relationships with them that we value as we try to navigate our clients through some thorny things that they have done before they got good advice. But the idea is know where to get the good info. And when it comes to planning with your assets to qualify for Medicaid, there's one source, and it is a real live lawyer. Now, I know people don't like lawyers. There's lots of jokes. What's a good start? Like a million lawyers at the bottom of the sea. I will say, you haven't met an elder care attorney. Most people tell me, and most of my colleagues are just like me, they go, you don't seem like a lawyer. You're too nice. Here's the thing, right? We are nice, but we're also ferocious advocates, right? But our job here is to guide you through that continuum of care in a way that you're going to feel like you did it successfully. And the type of work we do is tailored, it's customized, it's to you, for your benefit. That is as attorneys, our job is to always act in the best interests of our client. It's the first rule in the ethics book, right? And as elder care attorneys, we get to carry that out every day. And so we're going to give you the right advice for you. But married couples sometimes screw this up. Again, they get scared. And in terms of, couples dynamics, right? I'm not seeing this so much because go women, we're really starting to become more involved in our own economic lives, but we still see a lot of couples who had that quote unquote traditional relationship where he did the money and I took care of, home and hearth, right? And so they get to be 75, 80 years old. She's never even written a check because that's what he took care of, right? So that, and they've maybe let it go too far where there's dementia and he can't participate anymore. And we've got to get in and kind of unravel things that people have done in a panic because they didn't know what they were doing. The rules here are really important and can help you save real dollars so that we can avoid spousal impoverishment due to the care costs. So acronyms to know in this space are the MMNA, the minimum monthly maintenance needs allowance. This is the income side. So going back, if you remember what I said a couple slides ago, income and assets when it comes to Medicaid are two separate concepts and buckets, and you need to know how each one works. So on the income side, there's this idea that we can take back using the MIMNA some of the income from our spouse in the nursing home. So again, going back to my scenario where we had maybe a spouse who didn't work, right, in the paid labor force, right? They worked at home, taking care of the children, taking care of the house, and they're getting a little Social Security check based on their husband's work record, and he had the big income, right? So the MIMNA allows us to keep back, through a calculation that we do. It's a little bit complicated. Some of that institutionalized spouse's income for our community spouse to help her stay afloat in the community. The CSRA, the Community Spouse Resource Allowance, is another tool that we have, to make sure that the community spouse isn't losing everything. So those two numbers are each bracket represents the minimum on the left, maximum on the right. The way we look at this to figure out what your CSRA is, we take all of your countable resources. So what we talked about, the non-countable, right? The house, the car, the burial, and a critical one, the community spouse's IRA, right? So sometimes we'll have a community spouse who has worked, has a really healthy IRA, 401k, 403b, any kind of retirement account. That's going to be completely not countable. So we could have a community spouse with $1 million IRA, and we could still get her spouse on Medicaid, right? And I think I want to point that out because sometimes people think, well, my IRA is $1 million. How would we ever get Medicaid, right? It's because it's an excluded resource. So again, understanding the rules is really important. So we take the countable assets, which is everything else other than the excluded, and it's whether it's in the name of the husband, the name of the wife, or joint. Here's another critical sort of thing to know in terms of your foundational understanding. Some people come to me and say, oh, I put all of his accounts in my name alone. We're good. They thought of that. Again, if it's cash account, it's cash account. Even if it's only your money, husband, wife, or joint, it is going to be countable for the Medicaid calculation. Doesn't mean all is lost, right? There's always planning we can do, and that's beyond the scope of this. But just know, that's how it works, and that there are these things called spousal impoverishment protections that can be triggered for married couples. So then this brings to mind, I'm sure people, well, what do we do if we have more than that? Like what do we do? And I think a lot of folks have heard about the idea of spending down, right? This is not something you should do without legal advice and solid legal advice. You should not just go spending all the money on things that the internet says you can spend them on. Because what you could do, we talked about the concept of a CSRA on the last screen and the maximum number. How you arrive at that maximum number or whatever number it's going to be is you take all of the countable resources and you divide them by 2, and then you figure out what that number is, and then it's up to a cap. The maximum number is your cap. Most of us have enough math concepts to understand that if I start spending all of my countable resources and then I go to divide my pie in 2, the amount of the scissor I'm allowed to keep is going to be that much smaller, right? So you never do a spend down in a panic because someone says, well, you got to go start. Do not do it without the benefit of professional advice that's tailored to you. What you do, when you do, really does matter, right? And I've seen it time and time again where people are counting on the internet to give them the straight dope on what they're supposed to do, and it's wrong, right? Or it's not the right advice for them. So even though on here we have these examples, how you do it, when you do it matters, right? Why you do it. The other thing that people do in a panic is gifting money or assets without getting a legal advice transferring assets incorrectly. Really common question I get all the time is, can I give my house to my child for $1? I found a deed online, and I can just fill in the blanks and get it done. So can I just go ahead and do that? And, it seems really easy, and I don't even need you, lawyer. And yeah, You can. There's lots of things you can do. But is it something you should do? And the answer in most cases is no. It is a really lousy idea. Once you give away your house, it's not yours anymore, right? Your child could then kick you out if they were so inclined. If the relationship sours, the child could then get sued, and now your house is subject to the claims of his creditor. The child could get divorced, right? The people who want to do the house to a dollar, it's because everything's looking great. But you've got to think a couple moves ahead, and not to mention the tax implications, the loss of the step up in basis. There's lots of things to consider before you do something that is, yeah, I don't disagree. It is easy to fill out and record a deed for a dollar. Yeah, you can do it, but should you? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And no, the nursing home does not take your house, right? There are things that we can do, planning that we can think about, talk through. It is not an automatic the day you walk into the nursing home, they take your house, right? And just debunk that with people all the time. But you really must get financial, solid legal advice and financial advice. So oftentimes when we're doing plans with clients, we're working with their accountant, we're working with their financial advisor, because we know that the moves that we make now are going to have lots of downstream effects. So we want to make sure that, if you have those folks in your life who have, knowledge of your finances, your assets, your tax situation, we want to bring them into the conversation, and you want to bring them into the conversation. This is not the type of stuff where you do stuff and then ask questions later, right? You do it and then you say, did I do the right thing? Happens all the time. And I really want to encourage you to get advice before you take action. Again, no judgment. It's scary when you get that first nursing home bill, or you're told, hey, it's going to be $500 a day. I don't blame people at all for panicking, right? But what I would hope that we do through our education that we do with groups is that we encourage you to know that there are resources out there that are readily available to you, reliable ones, that can guide you through this process and prevent you from making big mistakes down the line. Again, another thing we hear about, the 5-year look back rule. This was a change from about almost 20 years ago now. It was 20 years ago, the Deficit Reduction Act of 2006, where they made all transfers subject to a 5-year look back. Anything transferred within that 5 years could be, but not always, again, this is where customized advice is critical, subject to what's called a transfer penalty. And here's what the Deficit Reduction Act of 2006 did. It made it that your transfer penalty does not begin to start until you are otherwise effective for Medicaid, meaning you're broke. So then how do you pay for the nursing home if you're broke? You have to get the money back from the person you gave it to, right? So, and what if they've already spent it? That's where filial responsibility comes in. Pennsylvania still has a filial responsibility statute on the books. There is a pending bill, I believe it was just introduced, to repeal filial responsibility, but no one's, in DHS is really interested in having that happen, because so what filial responsibility basically says in a nutshell is that children can be held liable for the health care of their indigent parent. Now, there's certain exceptions if your parent willfully abandon you and things like this, but it's something to be mindful. Like if you've taken a large gift and then expect Medicaid to kick in within the 5-year look back period, you could have a problem with filial responsibility. So you want to just know about that. And if that makes you have heartburn right now, then then you definitely want to call your favorite elder law attorney and get some professional advice on that. So excluded resources, we've talked about that. We've talked about timing. I think we are running short on time, Mary Pat. Do I have that right? So I want to just kind of skip here. I don't see that we had any questions, so I'll just kind of hit what's changing right now. So HR 1, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, significantly impacts healthcare by cutting, right? These are the cuts that everybody's panicking about. An estimated $990 billion from Medicaid over 10 years and restricting eligibility, potentially causing over 12 million people to lose coverage. And the key thing is are these Medicaid work requirements, reduced funding for states, and limited coverage for immigrants, right? So that's kind of it in a nutshell. That's what we're facing. And then we know earlier this week, this has been all over the news, Dr. Oz, the secretary for CMS, which I still can't believe is a sentence that is not a joke. That is the current state of our system. Is we've got a TV doc in charge of Medicare and Medicaid. I'm sure he's a lovely person who enjoys his charcuterie, but I don't know that I love him in charge of my Medicare and Medicaid. That he's announced that states have 30 days to turn a plan to revalidate all the healthcare providers that participate in Medicaid programs because they're convinced that there's just rampant fraud, waste, and abuse. And there very well may be. I'm not going to say that there's no fraud, waste, and abuse. I'm sure that there is. But this can have real impacts on how, folks who are already in the safety net systems get care. And, in particular, when we think about solo agers, right? These are people that really rely on the safety net systems. There's nobody else that they're going to be able to turn to, right? To be, to provide their care. So it is an absolutely huge issue. And then the work requirements that take effect early this year are just going to cause all kinds of disruptions. People have to now prove twice a year that they have met the work requirement of 80 hours per month. Again, when I said this at the beginning, they're strategically making this not take effect until after the midterm elections, because this is going to really put things into quite an uproar for people who thought that they were on board with change that was going to positively impact their lives. And then the sort of thing that, this might be a little bit of a technical point, but I think it's really important. They've also, with this twice a year having to check on people, that's going to put unbelievable stress on our county assistance offices who already are overloaded, post-pandemic with all the people that went on Medicaid and, having to check once a year. Now having to check these folks twice a year is going to be an unbelievable stress and strain. They don't have the staff to do it, and then they're not going to get the funding to hire the staff to do it. It's going to be absolutely crazy. And then they're also reducing from a Medicaid in a long-term care facility the amount of time that we have to get our applications in retroactively. We're going from 3 months to 2 months. All of this is to say,
Chari, we do have a few questions in the
Okay.
Q&A. Maybe we have time for one?
Yeah, I'll do that. So I just want to
Okay.
say, just finish my sentence real quick.
Sure.
So this is all going to put a huge strain on our family caregivers who can be faced with the idea of having to leave the paid workforce, right, to care for people who are otherwise in the system and getting care, right? So all of these changes, I just want to break. Now that you kind of understand how things work, they're really going to focus on the home care, because that is not the entitlement part, the nursing home part. That is the part that came a lot with the Affordable Care Act expansion and things like that. So, for those of you who want to kind of know what's going on and what's changing, we're in the middle of it, right? We're in the middle of the storm, and it's really only going to get worse. So yeah, let's take a couple questions.
Okay, here's one. Sorry. Is income used to determine insurance premiums all inclusive? Wage, investments, annuities?
Great question. So Medicaid doesn't look at what you get from your investments, what you get from your IRA, RMD, right? If you're getting a fixed annuity that's been fully annuitized, that will be an income stream to you. So that will count as income, along with your Social Security wages, any wages that you earn, pensions, things like that. But your RMD, your IRA is going to count as an asset, right? So that, and your investment account, even if it's spitting out income to you and you told your broker, send me $2,500 a month, your investment and your retirement are considered assets.
Great, thank you.
For Medicaid purposes.
Okay. Here's another one. To complete an estate plan, do you need a team that includes an attorney, a CPA, and a financial planner?
No. Great question. So most people don't have those things. But what you need for an estate plan is someone to take a look at your assets, right? What you have, how they're titled, what beneficiaries you have. It doesn't take a financial planner usually to do that. For most of the folks that we serve, they don't need a financial planner. They don't have, millions and millions of dollars, and sometimes they do. But the biggest miss that I see for people is thinking, and this is since even when I work with people who, I started out working in poverty law, right, in Philadelphia. I don't have an estate. I don't have very much. Everybody has an estate. No matter what you have, it's important, right? And you want to make sure you're not leaving a mess down the road, right? So, Philadelphia, we have huge problems with people think, oh, I just own a little house that isn't worth very much. Now we have all these tangled titles.
Mm.
Estate planning is a process, right? It's not a pile of paper. So if you think all it is getting documents that say will of me at the top and, filling it in, you're missing the mark entirely, right? Yeah, you're going to get documents, but they're not going to be great. And I say that because I look at, there was a barber shop in my old neighborhood, and the guy had a sign in the window, and it said, "We fix $10 haircuts." And I should have a sign in my window that says, "I fix internet estate plans," right? That because again, you think you're doing the right thing, right? It looks, looks good to me. But just like if you try to do, fix your own car, do your own plumbing, you don't know what you don't know. It could look good, but you don't know what you're looking at. You're just following prompts on a screen. So while you don't need a financial advisor and an accountant, you do need to kind of have a willingness to engage in a real process that looks at your situation, your goals, your family dynamics. Yes, like so many times I look at clients will come to me with documents they did on the internet, and they've named their oldest son, usually is what they do. Well, as their agent under financial power of attorney. And I'll say, well, tell me about your oldest son. And they say, well, that's always the sign. Well, right. He's going through a divorce. He just lost his job because he's drinking. But he'll be upset if I don't name him. Like, well, we got to talk about that, right? That what you get out of a planning with an attorney, and that's just sort of, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek example, but the idea of really delving into what's appropriate for you, what you've selected. Almost every engagement I have with clients, they tell me, I didn't know that. I never would have thought of that. I never would have thought to ask that. I had forgotten all about that asset, right? You don't get that if you're not engaging in a process, right? So while you don't need, a cast of characters behind you to do it, you do need to have a willingness and understanding that going through it as a process means that what you get at the end, the documents and things like this, are going to be what you want, allow things to go smoothly, and make sure that whatever your wishes are known and honored, when you're no longer here to, make
Right.
sure people
Thank
do what they
you.
want.
I see our time is up. Thanks, Chari, for some great info. As I mentioned, this is going to recorded and be on our website because I think people will probably want to look back and look at it again because it was so full of so much good information. So look either, and I'll just give you connectedly, CONNECTEDLY.org or AndersonElderLaw.com are the two sites that you can use as resources. And we'd be happy to hear from you, as I'm sure Anderson Elder Law will be too. So thank you to everybody who joined us. And again, Chari, this was great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Have a good day,
Everyone, thank you
everybody.
so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.